I think in this line of work, you're dealing with bias all the time because we deal with people from every walk of life, every socioeconomic, every age, come from all over the world, all over the United States. So, this idea that, all right, well, I've experienced something here in Idaho over and over, or I experienced something yesterday that is exactly like this. As a cop, you kind of get trapped into that of like, oh, wait a minute, this is not anything like that.
Sheriff Clifford,
Matt
Mr.
Todd,
Saunders, thank you for coming.
yeah.
I appreciate you guys.
Thank you for having us. Appreciate it. Glad to be back.
Yeah. So there's a lot. There's a lot that's coming up. We just finished the legislative session, which is awesome. There are a lot of things, though, that people pay attention to that are not really the inner workings of the sheriff's department, right? Sheriff's office. So that's, I kind of invited you on to find out a little bit more information about that. Let's start with a big one that a lot of people that I know that move here, including me, when I moved here, I was really worried right out of the blocks. I'm like, I got to get rid of this license plate. and I had, because it's like the dumb California license plate. And I was like, God, this is not the right move. And we even had people that were telling us, they're like, look, you need to get rid of that really quickly because there's this, I believe he was the story went. There was a deputy or some kind of police officer on the way up to McCall that was stopping people with California license plates and essentially telling them like, go home. You don't belong here. And people were really worried about that. Like my neighbor was like, oh my God, this is a real thing. And of course we got our license plate. My wife had us like lined up so fast, just flipping them. We had the 1A real fast. Anyway, that's a concern and fundamentally a bias that I think a lot of people moving here are anxious about. And it's a difficult thing to discuss because if you bring up the concept of bias in general with law enforcement, everybody assumes that bias predominantly has to do with race or ethnicity or something of that. But this obviously has nothing to do with it. It's a concept that geographically you've changed and that makes you a better or a worse person. How do you deal with bias? And is it something that you try to address or do you just kind of let people be who they are?
Yeah, I think in this line of work, you're dealing with bias all the time because we deal with people from every walk of life, every socioeconomic, every age, come from all over the world, all over the United States. So, this idea that, all right, well, I've experienced something here in Idaho over and over, or I experienced something yesterday that is exactly like this. As a cop, you kind of get trapped into that of like, oh, wait a minute, this is not anything like that. And you have to really look at, okay, what's really going on here? A really great example, when I transferred years ago out of our police services bureau into our court services bureau. And I did that because, I was kind of turning into a little bit of a burnout cop. I'd been pushing a car for, I think, 15 or 16 years straight of just doing patrol work. And pretty soon, here I am at this intersection again. How did I get here? 15 minutes later, I'm back at this intersection. How did I get here? Well, then I noticed calls are coming out and, a domestic would come out. And I'm like, oh, I've been to that neighborhood for domestics before. Yeah, I already don't like these people. Well, I quickly realized, well, that's not fair to the public because I've created this bias of I'm going to go to this domestic in this neighborhood that I've been to 100 times. It's going to be a mess. And we're going to try and solve this people's 20-year problem or at least put a Band-Aid on it. And it's going to be exhausting. Well, that's not fair, right? Because they're not all like that. And they're not all exhausting. And they all need to be serviced appropriately and have problem solving. But that's my bias. Here we go again. Here's this call again. And I realized, hey, that's going to create problems starting out. These people are not going to get good service from me because I've just decided I hate the call. And that prompted me to make a move and say, I need to make a change in my career to get a fresh perspective on another part of our agency so that I am not that jaded cop that thinks this is what everybody's like and it's me against them type thing.
MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com. Yeah, that's actually what you said at the end. When I was in education, I started out doing like 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade math. And I really enjoyed education. I was like, this is great. I love tutoring. This is awesome. And by the end of my time working with those kids, if somebody called for 7th grade math education, I was like, I hate this person. Yeah. And I had no idea who this person was. I didn't know what the problems were, but I did know that there was a high probability, not a confirmed instance, but a high probability that this was going to be somebody who, the parents didn't want to sit down and do homework with them. The kid didn't want to do homework either. The teacher was perhaps not communicating effectively with the parents about the missing assignments, things like this, and that delivered a bad math grade. So the large part of my tutoring was going to be requiring the kid to do the most basic things and then trying to interpret what the teacher wanted from the kid. And sometimes the kids wouldn't even turn in the homework that we worked on. It was like, wait a minute, I came here for an hour and a half. We did like 3 homework assignments that you were missing, and then you didn't even turn them in. So every time I got that call, I'm like, God, I hate you. The people,
right? It's like, it's the same concept.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. When you said that, of like the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I'm like, oh my God, I know this. Not from a law enforcement standpoint, but just a totally circumstantial standpoint.
Yeah. And it's not fair.
Right.
It's not fair to them, right? Because you're there to help them and help them get through.
No, all of those 7th graders got what was coming to them. All of them. I hate all of them. It's just, God, oh my God. Oh, yeah. One kid literally didn't turn in homework for a semester. He ended up getting a worse grade than when we worked, before we started. And the parents got mad at me. I was like, I'm out. I can't with this. So, okay. So if you know that, like what does the sheriff's office do in Ada County to address this kind of thing?
So I brought my data analytics manager, Chris Saunders, with me, who kind of helps us navigate through that. But in a super simple form, you basically take folks into our academy. We do our own academies, and you almost have to tell them, hey, remember everything you know about human beings, but also forget everything you know about human beings, because you're now going to experience every different kind of person we got here in Ada County, like a young to old, the socioeconomics, all the things I mentioned before. And then we're trying to get them to get out of their own way as far as, you're going to go to these people's homes, you're going to go inside their homes, and you'll have to make certain assumptions for your safety. And then you're going to have to make certain assumptions. You have to get rid of certain assumptions to solve the real problem. Right. And so we have Chris teach them a class that has come a long way. And he teaches it kind of all over the state. It's required by post, but I'll kind of hand it off to Chris, since he explains it a little more eloquently than I in my simple mind.
I can imagine.
Yeah, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks for coming, Sheriff.
Yeah. You gave me the like a boss cup, but I feel like it's
an approach in
the eye.
Yeah.
So the
get a little closer here, Chris. There we go. All right, hit me.
So the approach that we take is to help normalize the idea of bias. That bias is a totally normal thing that we all have. We've had it since before we were born and developed our biases throughout the course of our life.
Right.
Based on our experience, based on the things that we know, based on the things that we've seen, all of that. And as we get older in life, we keep accumulating these biases, and we keep experiencing things that either prove them to be right or prove them to be, well, maybe I need to explore this bias a little bit.
Sure.
I think one of the things that we've really been successful at doing is navigating the idea that racism, what I call the isms and the obias, are a type of bias, but they're a very isolated, very specific type of bias, where we operate on biases all day, every day. And so we try to normalize the idea that we should have this conversation. We should talk about the fact that I would like to go this route home versus this route, or I like to go shop at this store versus the store. The process behind those decisions is bias. We have a bias because in my past, I've had a better experience at this location, or I'm biased towards getting home from work as quickly as possible. So I'm going to take the quickest route home. It may not be the prettiest route, but it's the quickest. And so my bias is towards time versus beauty in that particular situation. So when we teach the class, like the sheriff said, we teach them to be aware of the things that they're bringing into those situations that could get in the way of doing the job that they've been hired to do, and do it effectively in the way that we want them to do it. But at the same time, remember those past experiences, because they may save your life. Having those past experiences, the more years that you have, as a deputy, you have in the field, is going to make you a better deputy because of those experiences. But again, like the sheriff said, it can also jade you to what it is you're going to do. Oh, it's another one of these calls. Oh, it's another one of, this situation I've dealt with 1,000 times before. It helps them to find that middle ground of rely on the things that are going to keep you safe and alive, but let go of the things that are going to get in the way of doing the job we need you to do.
Okay. So help me understand from like a specific example standpoint, where outside of Idaho is predominantly Caucasian. This is reality, right? So the idea that you would teach an implicit bias course based on, hey, let's root out all the problems you have having to do with race, seems like not only an egregious waste of time, but it incredibly betrays the reality, which is you could have very negative active functional biases that are not serving you, that you're not even looking for anymore, right? So like, what are the biases that people have that you try to help them identify that do actually in this setting here, make them better law enforcement agents?
Yeah. So one of the examples that we teach is a phenomenon called the recency effect. It's the idea that the most recent experience you have in whatever realm it is you're talking about is going to be the most impactful for you, regardless of things you've experienced in the past. And I've been teaching this a while, so I've been able to collect some experiences. I'm not a cop. I've never been out in the field, but I can take in these experiences and these stories that are shared with me. And one in particular was really impactful to highlight this recency effect. This individual was patrolling in our South County unincorporated area.
Sure.
It was a night shift, so it's middle of the night, and he gets a call for a domestic in progress. For us, it's a high priority call, and so he throws on his lights and sirens and starts driving to the scene. While he's on the way, the dispatcher is continuing to send him information about what's going on, because again, we want them to have as much information as we can before they get there. And lo and behold, he realizes that the location that he's going to, the specific apartment number, and one of the names that have come across is for a call that he had been on 3 months before. He had been on this domestic violence call to this apartment number with this suspect 90 days prior. And so while he's driving their lights and sirens trying to get there, he's playing in his head exactly how this situation is going to go. I know exactly what's going to go down, because I've quite literally been on this call before. And he walks in to find the individual had been beaten with a hammer because the girlfriend had fought back that night. And he talks about having to take a step back and recalibrate his response to where instead of arresting the perp, he's now calling for fire and EMS because this guy needs help. He needs to get to the hospital. He talks about it as it being probably more dramatic than it was in terms of the amount of time. It was probably a second, right? But he does talk about the mental shift that he had to undergo to respond the way he was supposed to respond. He thought he knew exactly what was going to happen because of those biases, because he'd been on that call. He walked into a situation that was completely different, completely required a different thing from him in that moment. He executed it, got the guy to the hospital, and the things transpired as they will. But it was such a great example of bias. That's a way that the bias for him affected him in that moment, in that call, so much so that he shared this in front of a bunch of other deputies. Like, he's telling this story in front of a bunch of his coworkers, right? Kind of acknowledging a shortcoming, which is hard for all of us to do. But it was so impactful for him, and he's so related to this thing we were talking about. He's like, I have an example of this right here. I'm going to tell you about it. And those are the kind of things that we really want them to dive into is, here's some examples of what this looks like, but you all have examples like this too. Think about it. How have you seen this affect you in your life?
Gotcha. Yeah. It's, that's a really good one. And again, just I don't have a law enforcement background, but I can see in my own careers, I've had these same issues with different professional groups. And in fact, I have one client right now, potential client. They're doing these pilots and trying to make different types of content for their business. And in this particular field, it's a field that I know is heavily reliant on content, but very frequently the people are not interested in actually putting the effort in to make good content. So even today, I was like, oh, I'm going to send this over. It's not going to it's like, just, you have no idea. Like, yeah, maybe it's turned out that way a couple times. That doesn't mean every single person in this professional field is going to end up that way. So like, just knock it off. And here I'm like yelling at myself in my studio, like 6 a.m, but it's true. Like, it's true. And everything the entire experience I've had with this client so far has been very positive. So it could be different, but yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. I mean, and the reverse is true as well. I mean, I can remember years and years ago, it was during Katrina, and I responded to a home in South County. Family has a teenage boy, and sister of the wife, and they've lived here for 7 years. Sister of the wife gets displaced by Katrina and has to go live with family in Idaho. She also has a teenage boy. Well, the two cousins don't get along. They get in a fight. One of them falls and hits his head. They go to the hospital, stitches and everything. Well, the hospital calls and says, hey, this teenage kid was just in here, and this was kind of the story, but we want to let you know. All right. Well, we're obligated to go and at least do a welfare check and say, hey, what's going on? So we go in there, and I talk to the people that have lived here for 7 years, and like, hey, this is why we're here, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of becomes a no-brainer call of like, these two kids fought each other.
Right.
But then I turn to sister, who's from Louisiana, where it's not Idaho culture, and she has a bias against me, right? That she doesn't even realize. Well, I'm a cop standing in the living room, but she's had experiences in Louisiana. And so there's no, hi, how are you? Nothing. It's, I want all your badge numbers. I want blah. And what is happening here? It was weird, right? It was weird for me. But luckily, even as a young cop, I had the wherewithal to go, okay, it's kind of that cultural diversity, right? This lady it was almost a geographical culture at one point, but also she's come from the culture of this place in Louisiana where she probably wasn't treated very well by the police. And so now I break her bias by going, hey, here's my business card with my cell phone number on it and all these things. And by the end of the call, she just looked like, I don't understand what's happening here, right? But it's a good example for both of us, for me to go, oh, wait a minute. This person is not from here and is used to this thing that they're very familiar with of being treated not great by the police. And so I need to help her out, break that bias for her, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, obviously, we all come into every situation with the baggage of our life. And Dave Chappelle had a really hilarious bit about this, about how he feels bad eating fried chicken and watermelon in front of a white guy. And he's like, but it's so good. Like, he goes into this thing and he's like, I don't even think, like, I'm just worried that they might be worried about, like, there's this back and forth. It's like, dude, what a train wreck, but he's making light of the fact that he's aware that there might be these biases around him and he might have them and other people might have them. It's like, yeah, but you just work it through, it is what it is.
Yeah. And quite frankly, here in this state, I think your racial bias is not so much the focus of trying to get you to snap out of your comfort zone or try and think outside of what you think you already know. It's just this, like Chris said, it's a small piece of what bias is. We're trying to keep you safe by, like what Chris said, hold on to some of those biases for situational awareness. You have to, but also, hey, if you're going to give service, solve problems, figure out what's going on, you might have to snap out of all of the, well, I think I know how this goes because I've experienced it before.
Right. Plus, it's not functional. Right.
No.
Like, you don't have here, just because of the demographic. If you guys wanted to focus on racial bias within the police department or the sheriff's office, like, well, how many calls are we really even talking about affecting? Like, we're talking about affecting a broader spectrum of behavior or identifying as many categorical behaviors as possible. And if we just say like all bias stems from race, that's not a very functional way to actually improve anybody's policing.
And we have become, more diverse,
Sure.
but it's just not, it's not a way of thinking that we teach, and it's not something we even have to pound down their throats. I mean, the type of people we hire, we're not perfect, right? But we hire specific types of people that we know are going to work and be proactive. Have the corny part. They have servant heart. It's corny, but it's real. They want to serve. They want to be part of a great agency and come to work and work. So just by doing that, it helps kind of weed out a lot of bad actors. Again, nobody's 100%. We're certainly always shooting for it, but
Sure.
Just our hiring standards alone help keep that out of our agency.
You mentioned something just now, being proactive. Now, this is a big consideration in this area, especially when you have, Eagle has a smaller portion. This was a big snafu in the election this last fall. The ratio of police officers per population and then per geographic area they were dealing with, and a lot of what people said the solution was really just effective proactive policing, which is essentially you can't sit around and just wait for a problem. Like, you got to really go out and try to make the most of the time you have in your car or on your patrol. What's proactive policing like for the sheriff's office? What are you guys, what's your philosophy with it? Are you encouraging people to go out and make proactive stops and really get after it? Are you staying away from certain areas and focusing on other areas? What is that?
It's kind of multifaceted, but I kind of break it. It's a number of things. First of all, we running numbers for, I have the statistics guy, and we just finished our annual report, which Matt Todd got to peek at before the rest of the public.
It's beautiful. It's very colorful.
But it shows that we're very proactive. In fact, we're the most proactive agency in Ada County, and that's nothing against the other agencies. Some of them have some manpower issues, and their calls for service overwhelm them, and they don't have the time. But we did find that in general, we're about 3 times as proactive as far as officer initiated calls for service than any other agency in Ada County.
Now, okay, let's be specific. What's an officer initiated call for service? So you're saying you do 3 times as many, but what is that?
So what types of calls is that?
Yeah, like what is an officer initiated?
Right. So that's any time that they are doing a police function, not like eating lunch or anything. Sure. Doing a police function that they weren't dispatched to, a citizen didn't call in and want a call for service. So anything that they initiate on their own, like a traffic stop, a property check, a citizen contact. So your traffic stops and your citizen contacts that's quite a bit of those numbers. So all of those, hey, I had a minute, so I did some police work on my own and created a call for service by doing so. So that's what that officer initiated. We divided into citizen calls for service and officer initiated calls for service. Those are the two types of actions we take in patrol. So
gotcha. So it's literally somebody essentially being more efficient with their time while they're on patrol or on the clock.
Yeah. So we used to call it non-dedicated time, right? I'm not on a call, I'm not following up. If you have that non-dedicated time, we really, really impress upon people. This is what I always tell people. This is actually a barter system, right? It's a barter system. The county is going to provide you, they're going to pay a big chunk of your medical bills, probably going to pay your car payment, probably your house payment. They're going to help you buy groceries, all of those things. In exchange, we require something for that, and that's for you to work and help us fulfill the mission of the sheriff's office. And, I just like to break it down simple for them for that. And then not just explaining to them that we expect them to work. There are some other facets of it. Like, do they trust us, and do we trust them as far as the employees at the sheriff's office?
Sure.
If you have, especially in the cop world, if your employees don't feel trusted, then they will do less, because that's risk in their mind, right? They want to minimize risk, just like we want to minimize risk.
Right.
But they're going to do it by doing less in the time that they don't have to dedicate to a call for service. right?
If they don't feel supported by leadership,
Correct.
if they don't
Correct.
feel like if something goes wrong, you're going to have their back, or they don't feel sufficiently trained, they're going to initiate risky situations less frequently.
Correct. You'll get the, hey, I'm just going to sit here and take my calls, right? I'll just, when something happens, I will go do it,
Right.
whether it's begrudgingly or not.
Right.
But we don't breed that into our people. We really, really instill in them, like, hey, we give you a gun and a badge and a 2,000-pound car. We expect you to go out and protect the public, do your service to the community by going, that doesn't look right. The public pays me to go see what's going on here. Hey, maybe it's legit. All right, see you later. I'm on to the next thing. Or, oh, is that dope in your pocket? Now we need to deal with that.
Right.
So that philosophy has brought us to some significant numbers this year as far as our property crimes, our persons crimes, and our crimes against society. So I'll let you describe that because I do all the talking, but it also helps us see the concept of us trusting our people to go out and start looking for crime.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So if you break it down into the three categories, person crimes are exactly that. They're crimes against a person. So those are rapes, assaults, batteries, murders, stuff like that. Property.
Cybercrime against kids.
Yeah, I think that would
There you
fall
go.
in.
There you go.
Believe it or not, I think that falls into society crimes, but I know it's all right.
Man, you know me. I'm a hawk for these things.
Yeah,
Right?
here he goes.
Right.
Property crimes are exactly that. They're crimes against property. So that's fraud, theft, burglaries, car break-ins, stuff like that. Crimes against society act as a bit of a catch-all where if we don't know where else to put it, or it's not clearly a person crime, clearly a property crime, it goes into society crimes. The largest component of society crimes is narcotics, the actual narcotics and the equipment used in the narcotics. What we see in our data, if you look at our crime stats for this year, is our person crimes and our property crimes remained really stable, meaning they went up at the same pace that population went up. So crime kind of stayed right where it should be based on how many people are in our jurisdiction.
Right.
Society crimes went up immensely. I believe the number is somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% in 1 year. Almost all of that was drug crime. But this is what we know. Most drug offenses that we will send to the prosecutor to go to court are not being called in by a citizen. They are things that our deputies are finding while being proactive. They're going to a domestic call and finding drugs. They're pulling somebody over for a taillight and finding fentanyl. And so what we're seeing is a spike in our society crimes, almost like I said, exclusively narcotics. That is a direct result of the proactivity that our deputies are doing. And so you can look at it one way, which is crimes going up, which is true. But I would argue that the drugs that we're finding were going to be there whether we were proactive or not. And I'd much rather our guys be getting them off the street.
So to that vein, Deputy Gomez, the SRO guy, he actually talks extensively about having higher drug arrests and drug crime at a high school being indicative of having less drugs overall because you're actually taking them out off the campus. And you're like, listen, if you want to stick your head in the sand and drop your numbers as far as drugs that get counted against the high school, you can absolutely do that. You just stop looking for them. It doesn't mean the drugs are gone, but if you start spiking the level of drugs at a school, unless something drastic has happened to the population, it's most likely indicative of somebody being far more proactive and actually engaging the student body and removing these things. And of course, once they remove them, they have to indicate like, okay, took this off campus or arrested this guy for this. But he's like, overwhelmingly, you're going to have fewer drugs rotating and floating around those campuses. I had no idea that was something that you guys were seeing as well. That's wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great example. And that kind of used to be the old school way, not in all school districts, but in some of the school districts around here was, oh, well, we don't want your drug dogs to come into our school. Well, of course you don't. Because you don't want to
the responsibility of it.
You don't want to see that they found drugs in our school, even though we could tell you, no, we've talked to kids that say there's drugs in this school. Now it's a lot better nowadays.
Sure.
But that when I ran a drug dog, I remember being at a specific school in a specific school district of, oh no, we don't bring your dog in here because we don't have a drug problem. I'm telling you, you do because these kids over here are telling me about it. Nope, we don't have a drug problem. We don't want your drug dog in here. Well, it's because you have to deal with it, and then you have to admit to someone there's a drug problem. Now, it's not like that anymore. I can't speak for all the schools and school districts, but we do a lot more proactive. Hey, does the SRO and the principal want to participate in, this thing? And you start pulling drugs out of the school, but now there are less drugs in your school, right?
Right. And of course, then parents start looking at statistics and they're like, well, this school has a ton of drugs.
Right.
Like they used to.
Yeah.
They used to, but obviously somebody's going after them pretty aggressively.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's essentially what you guys are seeing. It's not necessarily that you have, I mean, we may have had an increase in drug, movement or drug sales or something, but you're also increasing your capacity to proactively go after that.
Yeah. And there are other calls for service in there like DUI, we do a lot of traffic stops and make a lot of contacts that way. Because quite honestly, that's where a lot of crimes are solved, are on traffic stops. And I know people, they hate the inconvenience. If you take care of your stuff and don't speed, you're probably all right. But I mean, you look at, I think Timothy McVeigh, he was caught on a traffic stop by some dude, right?
Yep.
Just making a traffic stop. I think he had expired tags. I mean, obviously not every traffic stop is a domestic terrorist, but
who's Timothy McVeigh?
Oh my gosh.
I don't get out much. I don't watch it.
Oklahoma City bomber.
There we go.
Yeah.
I was really young at the time. Okay.
Sorry.
You're talking, that was what, 2.5 decades ago?
That was a little while.
Come on, man.
Sorry.
I can't. Yeah.
It's still a relevant example.
I was like, is he talking about the McVeigh who's the NFL coach? Like, okay, I don't.
Sean McVeigh. Yeah.
I worked with his younger brother for SAT prep. Like,
Oh, really?
I know the McVeighs.
Nice.
Yeah.
That guy wouldn't do that.
Yeah. The dad was all, every time I'd see the dad, he'd be like, look at me. He's like, oh, hey, I could, because he's like, look at the TV behind me. I was like, sir, I can just get out of the way. He's like, no, I wanted to. Ooh. He's like watching his son coach. Yeah, it was pretty funny stuff. Talking about proactive policing, that comes from the top down. Right? Like if you have a culture that you got lucky that you found deputies and law enforcement agents that just took it upon themselves, they're like, hey, look, I'm going to go hard. That's great. But you can't hope, right? Hope is not a strategy. So what is it that you guys have done in Ada County Sheriff to produce these incredible rates of proactive, effective policing? Because it's not just, hey, look, I'm being proactive and I'm not getting results. It's like, no, we're getting proactive policing and actually getting effective results because of it. Like, what are you guys doing?
Well, so one of them is hiring, right? We hire the right people, but the other one is a good decentralization of our command structure, right? So I can go as the sheriff. There's 850 employees, right? And they're not all patrol deputies, but there are a lot of places in our organization where they have to do proactive things.
Sure.
And I can walk around to everybody and say, I want you to be proactive. I want you to be proactive. But that's not going to be a good use of my time, and it's not going to be as fruitful. So what I did really quickly, stepping into the sheriff role, was decentralize and say, all right, my captains and directors, which are the people that run each bureau, we have 5 bureaus. I said, you have my direction, right? And I trust you to go forth and take my direction and implement it while I'm doing all these things, working with the legislature, working with the commissioners, doing all the things that people don't even understand a sheriff does. Like, most people don't understand what my schedule looks like, which is totally fine. But that's why I need these folks, and trust them, implement the right people, and then I kind of demand a trickle-down effect, right? Of, okay, it goes out, you push it to your bureau, and you keep that trickle-down effect. Each rank is keeping the other one in check to make sure that those things happen. So that's a second part. A third part is that employee trust up the chain, right? The employees they've got to trust that you've got their back, or they do nothing. We've already mentioned it. And we've proven to employees over and over that, hey, we want you to be proactive, and we're going to back you so you can we've given you all this training, education, and equipment, and we've put you through this crazy rigorous hiring process. We have to trust you to do this job. And we prove to them, okay, we've got your back, get out there and do it. But you also prove to them that, hey, if you severely screw this up, we're going to have to fix it, right? You hold them accountable.
Of course.
And most employees expect that, right? They want a box to work within. They want parameters, especially this generation, especially. Tell me what I'm allowed and not allowed to do. And then they go for it. And I think using, even just those 3 principles really produces an employee that says, all right, well, I think I'm going to like working here. So let's get it done.
That's great. Yeah. I'm not cut out for that kind of thing. Like I am a specialist through and through. Like even when I was tutoring, again, I had my tutoring company for almost 20 years, and it's like, absolutely not am I giving the capacity to screw this process up to somebody else. But again, that's me. That's why I'm not.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, but that's the trick, right? Is, I'm not going to say I'm a specialist, but I can recognize who are the other specialists and put them in those positions and say, you're perfect for this position to lead in this part of our agency, do it. Right. So if I had you and I was like, okay, we need to make these podcasts and we need to make them great.
Right.
Well, find the right person for the right position and say, okay, go.
Yeah, man, it's a tricky thing.
I'm not saying it's you, Matt, but
no.
I mean,
I'm not. I'll tell you what, you got limited options.
Sorry.
There aren't many podcast producers in the area. Yeah. If you want a good video, it's tough. You could always go Zoom though. That's what everyone does. Yeah. All you need is a Zoom and boom, you got your own podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then you get to, show your audience a Zoom conversation, which everybody's dying to have more of.
Right?
I guarantee you that.
For more of that.
Yeah. I haven't really had a chance to look through this review, but Chris, are there larger stats that you think that people should really consider when thinking about the sheriff's office? Because again, I haven't looked through it, but some of the things you guys have told me just in this conversation is kind of like, wow, that's a big consideration.
Yeah. I think the biggest one, as we put that together and work alongside the sheriff is the call volume that goes into our dispatch center. Over 504,000 calls last year. That's mind blowing. And you can certainly go to bigger cities and find dispatch centers that take, in the millions of phone calls. And that's fine. But I've been with the sheriff's office almost 15 years and I've seen our call numbers and I look at that number and it just boggles my mind. I've gone into dispatch and sat with them and just, go over there at 4 p.m. when it's, rush hour. And it's literally chickens with their heads cut off is what it feels like, except they are so controlled and so good at what they do that they do it 504,000 times a year.
Right. That's like a 1,500 a day or something. It's 1,400 a day. That's a lot of calls.
It's unreal. The other one in there that is actually a new stat that we haven't pulled in the past, but when Sheriff and I were talking about what are some things that we think we should share about the agency that are interesting is our medical contacts in the jail. I don't think a lot of people realize, when we have, last year was over 900 inmates per day on average in our jail, that like you and I, they have medical needs, they have mental health needs, they have dental needs. Sure. Like none of that stops when you are incarcerated. And I don't remember the number right off the top of my head, but it's something like 32,000 face-to-face medical visits we did in the jail last year. Again, it's almost number, 100 a day. We're doing almost 100, urgent care type calls or, dental visits a day in the jail. We've always talked about the jail being a small city, between the medical visits and the 3,500 meals a day that we're preparing. It quite literally is a small city and it runs as efficiently as I think a small city could.
Yeah. And if you think about that statistic, 32,000 face-to-face medical visits, if you had a small city of 1,000 people, there's not 32,000 medical visits a year, right? So it's in some places it's a ballooned small city, right? And that doesn't even touch on, we can't provide for all their medical needs, right? We don't set bones and do surgeries and all those types of things. We have to take people outside the facility to do that. So like we saw with the IDOC shooting, weeks ago and those, the prison break, if you will, those are high risk situations. And we looked at it. It was like, 840 times
It was
we took
significant.
inmates outside of our walls to go to medical visits. So
And I'm sorry to interrupt. For people that aren't familiar with the IDOC, give a little background on that.
yeah, so it was an inmate, a high risk inmate from the Idaho Department of Corrections. So he was out south of town in the prison and allegedly faked an injury, and they brought him to St. Al's to the emergency room. And while they were putting him back into the van to get him transported back to the prison, a gentleman came out of the dark and shot two of the corrections officers, and the prisoner and the guy that shot jumped in a car and drove away and drove around the state and wreaked havoc. But that we always say, the highest risk things that we do are in transport as far as escape. Your escapes come from transport. And the public, they probably think, oh, well, geez, yeah, well, they'd take a guy to the hospital. We're doing that every day almost. And sometimes we have as many as 3 inmates out of our jail in the hospital. So those are high risk things that are happening all the time. I really get upset with the people who are like, yeah, you don't need this thing or that thing, or you don't need another deputy, because that doesn't happen here. Yeah, things are happening here. They just are. You get an increased population. We have a great crime rate. We really do. But the crime rate's the same, but the number of people committing crimes is larger because we have a larger population.
Right.
So, I just need the public to realize that we're doing those things all day. On the weekday, it's happening multiple times a day. We take people in the middle of the night to the emergency room. You never know what's going to happen. So even they shouldn't think that that's an isolated incident. That could happen any day of the week.
Right. Yeah, and I have to imagine that with the crowding of the jail system at this point, you have higher than usual or higher than you would otherwise, medical visits and calls like that. The more you cram people in, the riskier the situation is for the corrections officers actually working in the jail system, and of course it is for the inmates.
Absolutely. And you have to kind of remember that we're also dealing a lot with the part of the population that has some different issues. Either they don't take care of themselves, probably because of mental health or drug abuse, or they can't take care of themselves because of mental health, drug abuse, maybe poverty, and they haven't been to see the doctor for a serious ailment until they land in my jail. And then we have to take care of them. We have to. Right. 32,000 face-to-face medical visits will tell you that, of how much care we're giving to inmates. And I'm not saying that we should give them less care. I'm just saying that, it's a part of the population that tends to have some issues. And once they get here, we have to address their issues. They land in your neighborhood or your apartment complex. You don't have to give them medical aid. They land in my neighborhood, we got to give them aid.
Man, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Well, and the other piece of the puzzle, to piggyback on what the sheriff's saying, is how the jail population has changed over the course of the last couple of decades. We have all of our programs that we do, our alternative programs, the pretrial. Those are getting the low risk folks that, for other, all intents and purposes, would not have been a problem in the jail, right? They would have done their time because, 10, 15, 20 years ago, those things didn't exist. And so if you got arrested for a crime, but you were a low risk person, well, we just kept you in jail. We don't do that anymore. We have twice as many people being supervised in the alternative programs than we have actually in the physical jail, which then results in a jail that is far more dangerous and has far more dangerous people in it, yet the number of people in there hasn't changed. So when you take 900 people that are, middle of the road, some are, kind of scary.
Right.
No, that is the jail population. It is all those people. And so when that happens, you get your folks that need the high level of service for medical, mental health and stuff like that. But you also get folks that require a lot more of our detention staff to manage, just because there's so many more of them in the facility.
Yeah, a good way to look at that is, so our dormitory system, that's basically general population, right? Well, in any prison or jail, general population is where you put the people that you don't have to be managed as much. They're your low risk inmates, right? Your low custody inmates. Our jail population has evolved so much over the last 15 years that there's no such thing as low risk inmate in our jail. Like literally, there's no such thing anymore.
And now your jail's not filled with a bunch of people who got caught with a little bag of marijuana.
Right.
That's not it.
They are predominantly felony crimes. And now our general population, instead of it being low risk inmates, it's all of our medium risk inmates. So medium custody people are now general population. So that's how that evolution has come. It's like, okay, these people don't exist. So, and we still are, we still have people that need to be in here. So now general population are medium custody inmates, period. So.
Man, that speaking with you as much as we did about the jail bond and understanding that it's such a complex situation.
Oh, it is.
I mean, just what you're pointing out, which is, hey, we changed the demographic. We have all of these alternative programs, people coming in on the weekends to serve their sentence so they can keep their job during the week. All of these issues. It's like, God, man, it's so intense. And then you're like, hey, it would be really good if we're, considering we're significantly over capacity and have been for some time to get a little more funding. People are like, they're all criminals. It's a little more complex than that. And like, I'm not saying it's
bread and water.
Yeah, right. I'm not saying I don't know all of the nuances. I'm not saying that the jail bond was perfect or whatever, but it's far more complex than people give it credit, which is like, look, the area is growing. The sheriff's office and the jail system is really getting stretched and doing the best they can. It's just really, it's out there.
A lot of hardworking people inside the jail. I mean, a lot. We have a big chunk of employees that work in there. It can be an unforgiving job, but it also is actually a great career because we've grown as an agency, so people can make careers out of the jail. But really good people. Really good people.
Yeah, I know some of them that I trained jiu-jitsu with. They're definitely good people. Listen, I've had you guys for a while. I really appreciate both of you coming in. Is there anything either of you would like to say in closing?
I don't know.
You don't have to listen to me. I appreciate you. We did a touch up just a couple months ago anyway.
Yeah, we did.
So no big deal. But Chris, good to meet you. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate all the stats. And again, it's good to hear these things because things are complex, and then putting numbers to them and understanding specifically, especially things with like bias towards a license plate and then bias in general, understanding how that actually plays out in a sheriff's office and how it's not the horror stories that perhaps other states you see in other states with, nonsense and whatnot. It's really good to understand that stuff. So again, I appreciate both of you. Thank you for coming in, and we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely. Have a look at that report. And next time I come in, you talk about whatever statistical stuff you like off of that. And we'll go from there.
God bless it, man.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. MTU Studios is the proud producer for the Ada County Sheriff Podcast, the Idaho Wildlife Federation Podcast, the State Representative Ted Hill Podcast, the Idaho State PTA Podcast, and many more. If you or your organization is thinking about starting a podcast, MTU Studios would love to help. Just check out mtustudios.com.